Hello, friends, and welcome to Narrative on a late night, Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, 12 midnight. How's that for a late night appearance by us? I'm here because I couldn't take it anymore. I was doing the show for tomorrow. I was preparing for it, and I was like, oh no, I got to get on the air and just clarify some of the things that Donald Trump told Elon Musk that was completely false, crazy, unhinged. This interview was the most terrifying interview of a potential future leader of this country you've ever heard. The claims are ridiculous. His ability to even explain himself is basically non-existent. He does not know how to complete a full structured thought. And so what you land up with is a sort of rantings and ravings of this aged politician who is wanting to be the president of the country again, where the interviewer is another unhinged guy, Elon Musk. And Elon Musk lands up having to fill in so much of the space that Donald Trump couldn't fill because he doesn't understand his own policies. He doesn't even have policies. That's what we landed up with. We landed up with two crazy dudes talking to each other for 2 hours to an audience of 65 million people. Now, that is incredibly dangerous and probably illegal. I'm also wondering, why is Elon Musk and Twitter providing all this free election support to Donald Trump, especially because he was just recently convicted of exactly the same thing with David Pecker of the National Enquirer. And this is exactly the same setup, basically. He will just completely whitewash the news. We'll cover up all the truth, and we'll just give you, Donald Trump, free publicity, free endorsements, you name it, to our massive audience of 65 million people in one night. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. Alex Jones hosting the other after show on Twitter. It gets crazier and crazier all the time. There were many unhinged moments. We'll try to go through as many of them as we can, although really we will do a show tomorrow night, which will be much more complete than this. There were at least a handful, or maybe even 10, outrageous claims that he made. There's a lot of facts that were misrepresented, a lot of things that were wrong. But perhaps the biggest breaking news that I heard during the entire time, and I'm so surprised that this hasn't been picked up a little bit more by everybody, and maybe I misheard it, but let's listen to the clip together, was this crazy assertion that Donald Trump seemed to make during the interview. He said on a couple of occasions that October 7th, the attack on Israel by Hamas, would not have happened if he was the president of the United States. And then he later on also said that Ukraine would not have happened if he was the president of the United States. Now, that second one, maybe there would have been some sort of weird deal that would have forced Ukraine into submission. That would have been a very bad thing for the West and democracy, and possibly landed us into World War III. But we'll leave the Ukraine thing aside, because the thing he said about Israel was really fascinating, because he decided to allege on this international forum that he has with Elon Musk that he believes that Russia, Vladimir Putin, was responsible for the attack on Israel, the October 7th attack on Israel, and that it all had something to do with Joe Biden. It's very unhinged stuff. It doesn't really make sense. If it's true, which it could possibly be true, although it's never been revealed by any reputable source. But if it's true, it will be an interesting, different version of events that originally happened as far as we know them. But let's listen to what he had to say.
And Israel would have never been attacked. It is zero chance. And again, I said to Vladimir Putin, I said, don't do it. You can't do it, Vladimir. You do it, it's going to be a bad day. You cannot do it. And I told him things that what I do. And he said, no way. And I said, way.
Firstly, he said way, and I said no way, or was it he said no way, and I said way? This is not the talk of a presidential contender here. This is the talk of a child, obviously discussing foreign policy, treating it like it's some sort of children's game where we just put one threat on the table and another threat on the table. And we're quite sure that Donald Trump did not stand up to Vladimir Putin in any way, judging by their previous appearances together.
And Israel would have never been attacked. It is zero chance. And again, I said to Vladimir Putin, I said, don't do it. You can't do it, Vladimir. You do it, it's going to be a bad day. You cannot do it. And he said, no way. And I said, it's the last time we ever had the conversation. He would never have done. I got along well with him. I hope to get along well with him again. Getting along well with them is a good thing. And Israel would have never been attacked.
He's repeated the stuff about getting along well with Vladimir Putin many times before, but I've never heard him in the way he has described it there, anyone really described it there, that Vladimir Putin had anything to do with October 7th. He was involved in the negotiation, apparently, of the release of some of these original hostages that were taken that were Russian citizens. But what would Vladimir Putin have to do with launching an attack on behalf of Hamas or ordering Hamas to attack. It does make sense. I mean, there is a school of thought that you could say that Vladimir Putin and Chairman Xi of China are in fact responsible for everything that's been going on around the world lately in terms of the volatility of the world. And in that sense, maybe you're right, Donald. Maybe there is something to be said there. If you know that our worst adversaries in the world, like Vladimir Putin and Chairman Xi of China, if you know that these people are plotting these attacks on our allies, and that just knowledge that could help save our allies, and they've not done that, is tantamount to treason, frankly. If he's correct in his thinking here, I hope someone challenges his version of events directly to him, because I'd like to know directly from Donald Trump whether he knows that Vladimir Putin had anything to do with the October 7th attack and that it destabilized the world so much. And is he suggesting that it was to embarrass Joe Biden? If that's the case, it does also make a little bit of sense, but it's not publicly known. This is not a fact. We can't take it as fact-based just because, certainly can't say it because Donald Trump is saying it. But if he is, that's a major significant miss that he did not tell the American people and the Israeli government that this was coming. You would think the first thing he would say to the Israeli leadership and to our allies around the world is that this attack was coming and that we should be doing everything we can to stop it. Instead, it seems, if he's correct in his assertions there, that he told Vladimir Putin not to do it, but then failed to tell the American people that this attack was imminent, this thing was about to happen, never mind our Israeli allies. That's a miscarriage of justice and an absolute abdication of his job and responsibility as the president. Certainly not a good reason to re-elect the guy. So that's just one of the many of these unhinged claims that came across today during this 2-hour parade of nonsense between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Now, the other big topic tonight was all about immigration. He went on and on about how 20 million people are entering the country illegally. That is not the case. That is just not the case. The numbers do not bear it out. And certainly right now, the numbers are way down. Yes, we have a massive immigration problem. The border is a serious problem. But that his solution to not come to the table when they negotiated that deal, Biden and the senators put together a compromise deal that really would have solved some of this immigration issues. But Donald Trump pulled that deal. And he pulled that deal because he didn't want a solution. He wanted this moment to exist. He wanted to be able to have something to hold against that very successful Biden and Kamala Harris administration. So he decided, I guess, on a whim, that he'd put America's safety and security at stake so he could try win another election. Because that's really, if you take his other claim that there's so many criminals coming in through the border, if you take that claim at face value, then he's allowed all these criminals into the border. Because if he had not reneged on that deal or not scuttled that deal, then maybe those criminals would not have come in. So Donald Trump having it both ways, or trying to have it both ways, on the issue of illegal immigration, and also incorrectly talking about the numbers of how many people are coming across the border.
Kamala was the border czar. Now she's denying it. Everything that I do, she's saying she was strong on the border. We're going to be strong. She doesn't have to say it. She could close it up right now. They could do things right now. It's horrible. No tax on tips. And all of a sudden she's making a speech and there will be no tax on tips. I said that months ago. And by the way, they had just the opposite. They had not only tax on tips, but they hired 88,000 IRS agents, and many of them were assigned to go get waitresses and caddies and all of this on tips. They were really going to go after you. And then all of a sudden, for politics, she comes out with what I said, which I think is terrible. And I think it's also hitting them very hard. These people are fake. Now they're also saying they did a good job on the border. We had the worst numbers in the history of the world, not of our country. There's never been a country in history that has had a catastrophe like this. We've had, I believe, and I think you believe this too, you hear 12 million, 13. I believe it's over 20 million people came into our country, many coming from jails, from prisons, from mental institutions, or a bigger version of that is insane asylums.
It's just not true what he's saying about the 20 million people. It is true that there are lots of people still coming across the border, although that number in the last few months has declined a lot, because as we all know, the Biden administration has taken these extraordinary steps by executive action in order to curtail the amount of immigrants coming across the border, precisely because of the concerns around this flooding of the border. But again, it was Donald Trump's opportunity to fix this problem when he could have, or when Joe Biden could have earlier this year, and he chose not to. He chose to scuttle all of that, all the good work that the senators had done, all the deals that they were able to reach, which were all historic with the White House. They were able to finally come to a deal, and of course he scuttles it because he is intent on winning an election, even if it means putting America's safety and security at risk. The other stuff about the tips and the wages, yes, it's new that Kamala Harris is in fact extending the decision not to tax tips. That's a very good thing for workers. It was a ploy, of course, by Donald Trump to bring in some immigrants and maybe some Latino immigrants in particular who might be working in the hospitality space in order to get them on board his campaign, which is largely about very rich, very elite people. He, in fact, was saying that this tip was a bit of a cynical ploy in order to get some of these workers on board. And that's why he believed that this would be a good initiative. Now he says that they're copying him. It's a policy. They're allowed to copy you. You might have had a good idea there, but it's only one idea. The reality of it is everything else about his tax policy involved tax cuts for the rich and entitlements for companies, reducing the tax burden on companies, which we of course know they already pay so little taxes. So why they need to pay even less taxes. This is the Republican Party masquerading as a populist movement when in reality, they are just pandering to the top 0.1%. People like Elon Musk, who today gave Donald Trump a 2-hour free advertisement on his network, on his social network called X, formerly Twitter, which is worth an enormous amount of money to Donald Trump and should be considered as a violation of the FEC, because it's just not inappropriate weighing in on behalf of one of the candidates for the 2024 presidential elections. Let's just call the whole immigration claim that he just made there a giant false one. Not the taxing the tips thing. That one is possibly quite true. But the other part, about 20 million people showing up across the border, not true. How many criminals are showing up? Not many. We don't think that there are that many. However, there is a concern that the more of these immigrants that are flooding out of places like Venezuela, by the way, which is allied to Xi, allied to Putin, these are all part of the strongman alliance, as some people call them. I call them the enemies of democracy. And Maduro is just one of the campers who's part of that team. And together they have obviously created an environment where they're pushing some people outside of Venezuela and outside of other countries. Maybe there are some criminals in there. Maybe some bad people in there who are being pushed across the border into the United States by their governments in order to create a destabilized America. And of course, when you think about it in that way, it's quite possible that Trump is in fact organizing and at least is aware of the organization of these let's call them criminal caravans or immigrants who are coming across the border because they're being sent by his allies, by the very people he says he's opposed to, but he's not. People like Maduro, people like Xi, and people like Vladimir Putin. And of course, he just mentioned during the interview tonight that he wants to have dinner with Elon Musk in Venezuela. Too weird for word. President Trump has lost his mind. I mean, he was always on the fringe of sanity, but he has really lost his mind. The things that are coming out of his mouth make absolutely no sense. And even though they might sound pleasing to certain parts of the population group, there's no validity to what he's saying. Here he is talking about, again, this is a mixture of the two stories we've already covered today. So this is him talking about illegal immigration and also talking about October 7th.
It's so sad when you look at Ukraine. It should have never happened. We have a defective government. These are defective people, and they're not people that should be running it. But where you see it the best is the border, because you had millions of people coming in a month, and then she gets up and she tries to pretend like she's going to do something. She had 3.5 years. And by the way, they have another 5 months that they can do something, but they won't do anything. It's all talk. She's incompetent and he's incompetent. And frankly, I think that she's more incompetent than he is. And that's saying something because he's not too good.
Yeah. No, I think it is essential to have a secure border.
He clearly is not putting together thoughts in the way you'd expect someone like Elon Musk to put together thoughts. So I have nothing to say about that. I just can't listen to any more of it. I hope you don't mind if we just skip ahead into some other things. That was him waxing lyrical about how legal immigration is just fantastic if there are specific kinds of people, and you can read between the lines what he means by those specific kinds of people. He does not mean a wide, diverse group of people representing the world. He means a very specific choice of people that he would want to bring into the country. Let's listen now to Donald Trump talking about the assassination attempt and what happened there. This is a really strange description by a man who supposedly was, party to this thing. He was attacked. He was shot at, and he's had his ears supposedly clipped. The way he describes this, it sounds like a children's story. Take a listen to Donald Trump on the attempt on his life that happened a few weeks ago in Butler.
You know what people think is when the local policeman, who, by the way, he did what he was supposed to do. He couldn't hold on any longer. And then when he got his head just peeking above, this guy standing there with a gun at his head. And when he fell down, again, hurt his ankle very badly, but he was making the calls. But what happened is the firing took place very soon. What they think is that this guy ran to his site, which he had all planned out with the gun. He ran to the site and he started shooting fast, and maybe that's why he missed.
Yeah, but
he
as you
got
said,
me, but
he
it
would have
could have
hit.
been could have been a much bigger problem.
But he totally would have hit if you hadn't turned your head. So there was it was a very near thing.
It was a miracle. If I hadn't turned my head,
yeah,
I would not be talking to you right now. As much as I like you,
exactly. Yeah,
I would not be talking to you.
Maybe talking to me from another realm, perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. We'd be talking from a different place. But it was a very terrible experience. The Butler Hospital, they did such a great job. The doctors were so good. Everybody was so good. There was a mistake if somebody knew, because people were hearing. There was just a bad feeling that somebody was around. You know that story now. It's been. And if somebody could have said, because they've oftentimes said, like there'd be a lightning storm or something, because I've done, I think, over 300. I think I did a lot more than that, but we did a lot. And oftentimes they'll say, sir, could you wait 10 minutes, please? Sir, could you wait 20 minutes? There's a storm overhead or lightning or something, right? And that happens often. And this would have been a perfect time for that to have happened, but it didn't get coordinated. That was the problem.
It was I think your actions in the heat of a fire. And what I find admirable there was that you can't fake bravery under such circumstances. The courage is instinctual or it is not. It's not a rehearsed action. And so I just want to say that I think a lot of people admire your courage under fire there. So
thank you very much. I appreciate it. I didn't think of it. I just wanted to get up and stand up. I wanted to let people know. I felt I was, when they were on top of me, covering me, actually, very much covering me, I wanted to get up. I said, I want to get up. And they wanted a stretcher. I didn't like the stretcher. And I knew I was hit in the ear, but I knew I wasn't hit anywhere else. They felt I was hit someplace else. It was such a lot of blood. And they were sure that I was hit someplace else. And they were saying, sir, you were hit more than the ear. I said, nope, I was hit in the ear. I want to get up. Let me get up. And so I got up. And the crowd didn't know what to think. This was so many people, and they were confused. They didn't know what to think. And I wanted to let them know I was okay. It was very important for me to let them know that. And they went wild. You really couldn't tell. When I stood up before the fist in the air, they didn't know if I was alive. Nobody did. When I put the fist up, relieved and happy and thrilled, and the place went crazy. It was pretty amazing. It was
It is a lot of Donald Trump talking there, but what happened on that day would have is still a question in my mind. We do not know for sure what happened during that assassination attempt. Clearly, there was a bullets were fired. Clearly, 3 people were injured. 1 person died, but there is much more to the story. There must be much more to the story because, as far as I can tell, I'm not even sure that there was a funeral for the gunman. We don't know very much about what happened to the gunman or the gunman's family. There was some confusion earlier on about whether he was really struck by a bullet or whether it was fragments from a bullet. He says there was a lot of blood, but none of us saw that much blood. And there was a little blood on the stage and certainly some blood on his ear, but it seemed to heal quite quickly. The next day, he was walking around without a bandage or anything like that. So how is it possible that they got to the Butler Hospital and suddenly they had found all this additional blood? Doesn't necessarily jive, nor have we heard from the actual Butler Hospital doctors who spent time with him to check his condition. They did not reveal what they saw. I am going to be investigating the assassination further because I still do not know how and why there was no funeral for the gunman. Maybe there was. I just haven't heard about it. We just don't know enough about the alleged extremist Twitter or other social media account apparently this guy had. It was raised once by Christopher Wray, but not really raised again. We've seen some of the reporting, and we've certainly seen the the Secret Services come into a lot of fire for it, but not enough details yet coming out on that. So we'll be following that up here on Narrative. Let's get to Ukraine now. Ukraine's a big story on this particular show because Elon Musk has an interest in Ukraine, and so does Donald Trump have an interest in Ukraine, as does, of course, Vladimir Putin. So this is what was spoken about tonight on their chat. Call it what you will.
You don't read about how bloody it is and how disaster.
Sure.
Hey, look, just in the two armies, you lost 500,000 people.
Wrong.
And
Yeah,
Ukraine's having a hard time. Ukraine, I don't know if you saw the article recently, and it's true. You don't hear the true story. But if you think about it, Russia's gone. Russia defeated Germany with us, and they defeated Napoleon. They've been around a long
Right.
time. They're a big fighting
The amount
force.
of Russian propaganda that
It's
these
very
guys.
unfair. And Ukraine
thing-
now doesn't have enough men. They're now using young men and very old men to fight. And
Just to jump in here, firstly, the number of soldiers that have died is 500,000. That's true, but that comes from the Russian side. It doesn't really come from the Ukrainian side, not as much. And so, this just reminds you of the connection that Donald Trump has with Vladimir Putin and Elon Musk has with Vladimir Putin.
The words that he was using, the stupid threats coming from a stupid face.
This is Donald Trump talking about Joe Biden. Now, I don't care who you are, the ability for this man to raise questions and to insult the current president of the United States, who is a remarkable statesman and a remarkable leader and a true historic figure in America. For Donald Trump to be able to go onto Elon Musk's platform and denigrate Joe Biden, one of the greatest presidents in America in history, is appalling.
Become complacent about, but they actually have forgotten that there are currently a lot of nuclear missiles that have targeting parameters for the United States from other
100%.
countries.
And one of the things
And,
we're going to do is
it's-
we're going to build an Iron Dome over us.
And now he's talking about an Iron Dome, and he wants to defend himself against nuclear weapons, which Elon Musk kindly reminding people that. And they go on about World War III throughout this entire interview about how we're imminently there at World War III. When in reality, the reason we won't go into World War III is because Joe Biden has done so remarkably well in maintaining a giant coalition against
Sure.
Russia.
Look, just in the two armies, you lost 500,000 people.
So in general, you got the sense that he's lying because he's not revealing the actual truth. It's a half lie, really, that most of the 500,000 soldiers that have died have come from Russia's side, that they're the fact losers in this war. In fact, Ukraine, I can't believe this didn't come up in the part of the interview that we listened to tonight, did not mention that Ukraine had made an incursion into Kursk region and that Vladimir Putin was melting down over the fact that the Ukrainians are now in his territory in Russia, on the verge of taking over large chunks of Russia and maybe making their way all to Moscow, on their way to Moscow to defeat Vladimir Putin. This is the news of the day involving Ukraine. And instead, you've got Donald Trump going on and on about how stupid Joe Biden is and how disastrous his foreign policy is. When in fact, we all know that Joe Biden has run circles around Vladimir Putin and has in fact been able to a large extent in just 3.5 years, been able to create a coalition around the world that is so formidable that he's been able to push Putin's expansionist ideas and the empire right back into Russian territory. And that could only be happening because Joe Biden did such a great job. And that Elon Musk and Donald Trump did tonight was just give us the Russian point of view. It reminds you again that this platform that you're watching, if you're watching on X or Twitter, whatever it's called, is largely run and controlled by Chinese and Russian operatives. So that was the Ukraine piece of it. Let's now listen to another thing that he spoke about on the topic of education. Again, these are claims that are vastly untrue, but let's listen to the ideas that Donald Trump has in terms of fixing education if he were to be re-elected again. And listen to this incredibly bizarre policy that he has in mind. It just boggles the mind that this is what he wants to do in order to fix the education problems in this country.
Think of education. So we're ranked at the bottom of every list of the top 40. We're ranked number 40, number 38. Norway, Switzerland, Sweden, different countries are ranked good. Actually, China's pretty close to the top. They're a top 6 or 7. but we're ranked at the bottom, almost at the bottom, 38, 39, 40. In other words, horrible. And yet we spend more per pupil than any other country in the world. So we spend more. And what I'm going to do, one of the first acts, and this is where I need an Elon Musk. I need somebody that has a lot of strength and courage and smarts. I want to close up Department of Education, move education back to the states, where states like Iowa, where states like Idaho, not every state will do great because states that basically aren't doing good now, you look at Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, he's terrible. He does a terrible job. So he's not going to do great with education. But of the 50, I would bet that 35 would do great. And 15 of them, or 20
I
of them,
thought
will be as good as Norway. Norway is considered great. You can name them.
California has a pretty good education system as far as I
Some
know.
of these countries are so good. But if you go into some of these really well-run states, we have states that don't know what debt is. We have states that have low taxes, no debt, everybody working. They're really well-run.
Sure.
And maybe they have certain advantages in terms of location, in terms of the land or the sun and the water and the whole thing. There are a lot of advantages that some people have. But if you moved education back to the 50, you'll have some that won't do well, but they'll actually be forced to do better.
So his idea is basically to take education money away from the states that need them, move them back to the states that don't need them, and make the rest of the 15 states suffer. That's basically the policy he's suggesting. It's not new policy, by the way. This is not new stuff for Donald Trump, but it basically is about turning the education system into a state-run system and allowing education to be something of a state domain, which really only benefits a few states. Maybe he says 35, but I don't think it's that many. There is a lot more I could talk about tonight, and I'll reserve the rest for my next show, hopefully tomorrow on Narrative. But I did want to get in tonight and just give you some sense of the amount of lies, the amount of just very easy to refute lies that Donald Trump was able to get away with when Elon Musk gave him an entire 2 hours of free airtime on his platform and his audience. 68 million people, 84 million people now saw that show. And yet it was full of lies and full of ideas that are inaccurate and unworkable. And sad that has happened. So to review some of them for you on the immigration claims, Trump's claim of 20 million people entering the country legally is not supported by any data that I've seen. The actual numbers seem to be much lower, although we don't actually have an absolute number because, of course, it's illegal immigration. In terms of foreign policy, the assertion that conflicts like Russia's invasion of Ukraine wouldn't have happened under his presidency, we just don't know. Maybe he would have made some sort of deal, and maybe that would have been terrible for America and terrible for democracy and terrible, but maybe it would have. Maybe the Russian invasion would not have happened had he waved the white flag and surrendered early to Vladimir Putin, which people would expect him to do if he becomes the next president of the United States. We didn't really get to inflation to a great extent, although in the show he talks a lot about the worst inflation in 100 years. It's not true. There's not been the worst inflation in 100 years. In fact, inflation is down to very manageable levels. And it's remarkable, again, that Joe Biden's administration is the administration that's been able to bring down that inflation, which really resulted out of the Trump policies at the end of his campaign. We spoke about education, but there's another thing that's important. He says in that claim, in that clip I just played for you, that U.S. education rankings are way low. They were near the bottom of the list when it comes to international rankings. Untrue. It is perhaps lower in some rankings than others, but not all the rankings are the same. And certainly it's not true to say that America is consistently at the bottom of the list. I think we're very highly ranked in many measures, maybe not in all of them, but certainly in many measures. The proposal to close the Department of Education, which we spoke about, of course, is just an opinion, not a fact. These are not things that he can actually do necessarily, but there is nothing to suggest that even if you were to shut the Department of Education, and even if you gave all the states the full responsibility to be in control of their own education, that it would do anything at all to create a positive resurgence of American education in these states. There's nothing to suggest that's even true, and he has no proof that that is true. He also, in that last clip, spoke about California and other states being badly run. California is a massive economy, makes a ton of money, has a lot of very happy people who enjoy a lot of sunshine, and who I think even have a larger economy than his friends in Russia. To suggest that California is a badly run place, especially when you are or were the worst president in U.S. history, is just too rich to be true. And you might as well learn the actual names of the governor of these states because they're national figures too. In terms of energy and AI, he does during the show talk about AI requiring twice the energy that countries already produce for everything. AI requires a lot of energy. It's also quite true that the more AI you use, the more energy you use. And that AI is becoming more efficient as the world progresses. And who knows, that technology might become a lot cheaper over time. Overall, 2 hours of propaganda from Elon Musk and Donald. Many of Trump's statements in this interview were just exaggerations. Some of them were outright lies. Some of them were just false opinions, for opinions masquerading perhaps as truths or facts, but they're not true or factual. We would do a much more fulsome, comprehensive fact check on this show tomorrow night on Narrative, but I didn't want to get too many hours of propaganda or let too many hours of Trump's propaganda just wander into Geist without being challenged a little bit here tonight. So I've done this impromptu live show, and I thank you for being here tonight, and I thank you for your comments. It has been a remarkable few weeks. Donald has had a terrible period in his campaign, the 3 worst weeks of politics you can imagine, as his campaign has completely stumbled. It's to a great extent an attempt by Elon Musk, his ally, who also seems to be part of this anti-democratic movement around the world, the enemies of democracy. It was an attempt by Elon Musk and Donald Trump to resuscitate an otherwise barely alive campaign. And they did that show for that purpose alone. They, of course, destroyed much of Elon Musk's credibility along the way, because even though people did not trust him or believe in many of the things he believes in, tonight he made it very clear that he has no sense about what is right and wrong, and no sense about politics in America when he endorsed Donald for the presidency. There is absolutely no reason to believe in Elon Musk on anything, because there's absolutely no reason to believe Donald Trump on anything. So it's sad to see the man who a few years ago we used to herald as one of the most smartest and richest men in the world. He may still be rich, maybe not for too long, but he certainly is not capable of making a smart decision by endorsing the right candidate. The right candidate, of course, is Kamala Harris, who for 3 weeks now has been running a campaign flawlessly and showing exactly what Donald Trump is doing wrong with his campaign. In fact, Donald Trump hasn't even been to a battleground state in 2 weeks or something like that. This is Kamala's moment, and this was their attempt at jumping in there and bullying her by calling Biden names, by calling her names. It's nonsense. It's a waste of everyone's energy to be listening to this guy. But if you were listening, at least you now know there's 84 million people were watching. Wow. That a lot of lies, a lot of crap, a lot of bullshit, a lot of stuff that you would never, ever expect an American president to sound like that. And yet there you are, a former president who can't even string a coherent thought together, making all these absolutely outrageous allegations against the current administration and the potentially future administration of Kamala Harris, which is following many of the same policies as Joe Biden has in the past. All right, that's the show. I appreciate you being here tonight. And if you want to be part of our community so we can reach you directly, the best place to do it is go to narrative.org and submit your email there. You'll get signed up for our newsletter, and you'll also get access to the narrative.org website, where there's content that is sometimes paywalled. But I thank you very much for being here tonight. I leave you with our anthem of sorts, the great Narrative Odyssey. I hope you listen to every word of this, because it sounds truer every day.
One day you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative, where truth lives.